The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
The house at the end of the dirt road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange sounds make the living shiver.
Where shadows lurk at the edge of the woods, just outside your back door. And mysterious lights speed beyond reason across the clear night sky.
Odd events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole.
I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, welcome everyone.
We'd like to take a minute and say thank you to those of you who left ratings and comments for us, and for those of you that started following us on our Facebook page. Thank you so much. We appreciate each and every one of you.
Yes, we do. And guess what?
What?
I have an update. So in episode 54, I covered the Voynich manuscript. It is this wild book filled with all kinds of fantastical illustrations and pages of unbreakable code from the 1400s. Well, according to All That's Interesting, two researchers named Keegan Brewer and Michelle L. Lewis have a new theory about the manuscript. They published an article in the Social History of Medicine journal saying that they think the manuscript is actually an encoded work about female anatomy and, quote, women's issues. So they have some pretty compelling arguments about how the illustrations are actually stylized drawings of what people in the 1400s thought women's reproductive organs looked like. And these illustrations kind of reflect the tiny, incorrect understanding that doctors had about it at that time. And the reason it's encoded was because it was totally taboo to talk about in the 1400s. So I thought that was pretty cool when I came across that.
Yeah, I remember you saying something about that the other night.
Yeah, I did.
And, yeah, it makes sense for the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I haven't seen the illustrations.
Oh, well, I can show them to you.
Oh, great.
They're pretty wild. All these weird flowers and things that people for a long time thought were astrological, like supposed to be different things in the cosmos and stuff. But They're saying, no, it's supposed to be, hoo-hoos and ha-has and all that stuff.
Interesting theory.
Yeah.
Well, who knows?
Yeah. I mean, we don't know. That's the whole point.
So, with that said, we don't have any housekeeping tonight, so what are you going to be talking about?
A haunted house.
Oh, awesome.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So, there's something about the lovely late Victorian-style homestead perched on a hill overlooking the town of Junee, New South Wales, Australia, that speaks to me. With its red brick facade and green iron lattice work along the first and second story verandas, it just looks like a happy place. A little too rectangular and symmetrical, maybe. It's lacking fancy widow walks and big bay windows, but it's just so inviting looking that I can imagine strolling up the walkway, past the stone statues of angels, and around the fountain filled with lily pads, to climb the 5 shallow steps to the front door. Once inside, I bet I'd want to stay for a good long time, because inside, the entire homestead is decorated in late Victorian-era furniture and wallpapered in floral prints. The doll room, containing thousands of dolls, might be a little unsettling for some people, but since I don't really have a fear of dolls, it wouldn't bother me. At least, I don't think it would. Now, it's possible that my gut feeling about the 1885 manor would change entirely once the sun went down, because for decades, the Monte Cristo homestead has been considered to be the most haunted house in all of Australia. And based on the chilling and tragic stories swirling around the alleged 10 different spirits who reside within its walls, it's no wonder. The trouble with the Monte Cristo homestead is that it's pretty difficult to research the historical accuracy of some of these stories. And so they continue to be passed on, regardless of whether they are the right stories or not. But it's nearly impossible to doubt any of the tales Olive Ryan has to tell about her experiences at the Monte Cristo homestead, since she's lived in the grand house since 1963, especially since she and her husband Reginald worked painstakingly for years to restore the once abandoned and derelict home back to its former glory. The very first time she and her husband drove up to the house after purchasing it, the couple were welcomed by the beautiful sight of the entire manor lit up, as if an entire community waited inside to greet them with anticipation. But as the couple reached the front door, every light went out. Strange, yes, but even stranger when they remembered that there wasn't any working electricity yet. As the Ryans restored the house and eventually welcomed guests, they discovered quite a few of them asleep in their car the next morning because their guests just couldn't stand another minute in the house. They were that unnerved by the ghostly happenings. According to the official Monte Cristo homestead website, montecristodoc.com, Christopher William Crawley was born in Sydney, Australia in 1841. Always interested in farming, he purchased 2 parcels of land on a hill above Junee and married Elizabeth Carr in 1860. Elizabeth was a Wiradjuri woman, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, but that's the largest Aboriginal group in Australia. She passed as white in order to be accepted by society. Although the Crowleys struggled financially for quite a while, they first lived in a slab house on the property and then upgraded to a brick cottage. In 1878, Christopher obtained a hotel license soon after the Great Southern Railway line opened in Junee. He soon owned the Railway Hotel, a very lucrative establishment, and he became one of the wealthiest men in town. He was so wealthy, actually, that he retired rather early in life, and by 1884, his Monte Cristo homestead was under construction. After all, he needed a home befitting his social status for himself, Elizabeth, and their 7 children. Their original brick cottage was converted into servants' quarters for their numerous servants, and the slab house became the Crawley family's stables. The homestead itself was built out of sandstock bricks that were fired on site. I looked it up because I didn't know what that meant. Sandstock is basically clay bricks that are coated with sand, as you would expect. Sandstock. But anyway, the first floor walls are 18 inches thick, and the upper floor is 9 inches thick, and they were made so well that even to this day, not a single crack has ever shown in the structure. Inside, the ceilings are 12 feet high, and they're built out of cypress pine, lath, and plaster. Once their homestead was complete, the Crowleys threw balls for their genteel friends and hosted tennis matches and golf tournaments on the golf course, which was the very first one in that region. The Crawley daughters, Lillian, Lydia, Florence, and Angela, who went by the nickname Pidge, were multi-talented. They each played an instrument and excelled in art. Lillian became an accomplished pianist and composer. Now, oddly, none of the sites I looked at mentioned the rest of their children because they had 7. I could only find information about the girls. Their mother, Elizabeth, liked to wear a black lace dress with a beaded collar and matching cap on a regular basis, and she was often compared to Queen Victoria in the way she carried herself. She also allegedly ruled her home with an iron fist, which trickled down to the servants, who often told horrendous stories about the way they were treated by both the mistress of the house and Christopher. Christopher Crawley passed away on December 14, 1910, and most historical accounts of Elizabeth after his death claim that she only left the homestead twice after he passed away. For 23 years, she stayed up on the hill, converting an upper-floor storage room into her own personal chapel. She passed away in the house at age 92 in 1933. Crawley family members continued to live in the Monte Cristo homestead until 1948, but by that time it had fallen into some disrepair and most of the furniture had to be sold off. It sat abandoned for over a decade. And then, in 1963, the Monte Cristo homestead saw a complete rebirth and revival when Olive and Reginald Ryan purchased it for £1,000. Together, the couple restored it, including the servants' quarters, dairy barn, stables, and ballroom, using as many original furnishings and fixtures as they could get their hands on. To fund their restoration project and support his family at the same time, Reginald worked as a tailor, waiter, day laborer, and door-to-door salesman until he eventually became an antiques dealer. His Monte Cristo antiques became an internationally known business, especially since the homestead was the perfect showcase for what they'd acquired. In 1986, the Ryans stopped dealing in antiques and opened the homestead as a museum, taking visitors on tours themselves. All 5 of their children took part in presenting tours, too. Today, Olive Ryan still lives at the Monte Cristo homestead with her eldest son, Lawrence, a motorcycle stuntman and world record holder. When Lawrence isn't jumping crop planes or burning vehicles on his motorcycle, he runs ghost tours at the haunted house he grew up in. There seem to be as many chilling and awful stories about the Crawleys' time at the homestead as there are alleged ghosts. Here are a few, according to Traces magazine. A maid fell to her death from the second-story balcony. There is a permanent bleach stain where her blood was scrubbed away. She was rumored to have been carrying Mr. Crawley's child. The Crawleys' granddaughter, Ethel, died at just 10 months old in 1917 when her nanny accidentally dropped her down the stairs. Morris, a stable boy, was too sick to work one day, and Mr. Crawley, believing the boy to be faking it, lit his straw mattress on fire to rouse him out of bed. The boy, who was not faking it, died in the inferno. Another little boy, Harold, was the son of Mr. Crawley and a second maid. Harold was involved in a carriage accident that permanently disabled him. He spent most of his life chained in the stable, and some sources say he was chained to his mother's bed, until he was discovered by authorities and taken to an asylum. And then there's the story of Jack Simpson, a supposed caretaker of the Monte Cristo homestead. The story goes that one day in 1961, Mr. Simpson responded to a knock at the front door. A young man who allegedly watched the movie Psycho 3 times in a row earlier in that day pulled out a gun and shot Simpson. This young man then carved, quote, "Die, Jack, ha ha," into the shed door. Now, I have to be honest and say that I spent quite a while looking for any sort of documentation on that one, specifically the Jack Simpson story, because it's relatively recent. And I couldn't find anything except more sites retelling the same story, and some Reddit forum threads where people tried to either prove or debunk it, and most of them were unable to find anything either. So, like I said, they're horrible stories and almost impossible to verify. Many of the sites dedicated to discussing the ghosts at the Monte Cristo seem to rely on these legends or lore, which is all I can really call them since I couldn't find any evidence that they're true. Now, I'm not saying that they aren't true. It's just that I couldn't find anything proving that they were. Of the 10 spirits who are said to haunt the Monte Cristo mansion, the most prominent is Elizabeth Crowley. If Elizabeth takes a dislike to anyone who comes into the house, she's not shy about letting them know that she wants them out. First, she's known to cause the temperature to drop immediately around that person until they feel the coldness in their bones. The lights may turn on or off. Mist might materialize. Disembodied voices might whisper in their ears. There are children's spirits at the Monte Cristo as well. Guests have felt a small hand slip into theirs as they walk up or down the main staircase. Other guests have claimed to feel a hand pushing them in the lower back, and young visitors to the house often become agitated while they're on the stairs. Many websites attribute these feelings to the ghost of Ethel Crowley, the infant who died when her maid accidentally dropped her on the stairs. But Harold, the little boy who was allegedly kept in the stables after his horrible accident, is often cited as causing the sound of rattling chains. People have seen the apparition of the maid who took her own life out on the second-floor balcony, pacing back and forth. Morris, the stable boy, is said to be the cause of the disembodied screams people have heard coming from the coach house. Now, I almost didn't mention these accounts, but they're so prevalent online that I figured that I should. But even if we take these accounts with a grain of salt, Olive and Lawrence Ryan's experiences in the house speak volumes. And as the everyday caretakers of the home for the last 60 years, they are the most credible, at least to me. Mrs. Ryan has shared her experiences with several media outlets, which I was able to find online. First, there's the experience Olive and Reginald had on the very first night they moved in, when all of the lights were on in the house when they didn't have any electricity. And then there are the times that Olive has heard her name being called, but can't find anyone nearby who could have called for her. Or the times she heard her name called, but she knew she was completely alone in the house. There were numerous times when she was alone over the years and heard someone walking out on the balcony, only to look and confirm that there wasn't anybody there. She told the Project TV show back in 2015 that she's felt a hand on her shoulder at least once, who she believed was Elizabeth Crowley trying to communicate with her. Her son, Lawrence, he's the motorcycle stuntman, has had more than his share of experiences as well, since as far back as his childhood. He and his siblings have all seen figures in period clothing wandering in the house, and they've all felt ice-cold hands touch them. But the most horrifying story he's told by far is about the family cat. In an interview he did with Escapes magazine, Lawrence explained why none of the 14 cats who live on the property ever come into the house. He said, quote, "We've never really been able to keep animals in the house. Ever since Mom came downstairs one morning and found the family cat on the kitchen floor, skinned and disemboweled with its eyes gouged out. Someone suggested that another wild animal could have done that, but all the doors were closed and locked." End quote. It's horrible.
It's pretty sick.
It's horrible. I saw some references in at least one of the sites that I was checking that they attribute that to Elizabeth not liking animals, but there wasn't really any documentation of that.
Right.
It's like speculation. Lawrence and his mother have never shied away from telling the many tales about their home, and they've actually embraced the Crawley family lore and are happy to pass it along. Lawrence says that it's the best way he can rationalize why his childhood home is so haunted. Since opening up some of the rooms as a bed and breakfast, Lawrence said that even guests are experiencing things, like something they can't see touching their feet in the middle of the night, or feeling an uncomfortable pressure in their chests as though someone is leaning or sitting on them. Some have seen apparitions standing at the foot of their bed, staring at them. Some have reported people walking back and forth in the hallway outside their room and stopping to jiggle their door handle as though they are trying to come in. And of course, when they check, there's nobody there. And there's also numerous reports of disembodied voices. Some of these guests are the ones who give up and go sleep in their cars for the rest of the night, rather than try to make it through inside the house, and some just leave the property completely. I found a great article in Traveler magazine from 2020 titled Monte Cristo Homestead, Junee, NSW, A Night at Australia's Most Haunted House by Rob McFarland. He paid a visit to the Monte Cristo homestead, and when he asked Lawrence about the hauntings, Lawrence told him, quote, "The spirits tend to stay away from the nervous Nellies. It's the skeptics who get the most activity." End quote. McFarland did his best to appease the spirits, even thanking them during his mostly sleepless night for allowing him to stay in their home. The following morning, as he was leaving, he asked Lawrence about the rather large dog he'd seen running out of the house before he went to bed. Lawrence looked at him with a puzzled expression on his face and said he didn't know what dog he could have been talking about, since they don't have a dog. The Monte Cristo homestead has rightfully earned its title as most haunted house in Australia, I think. It's quite possible that the lore is true. It would certainly explain the hauntings. But even if it's not, even if the stories are wrong, there's no doubt in my mind that there's paranormal activity going on there.
Well, it's definitely an interesting place. And although I do like the lore of it all, I really like firsthand accounts much better.
Yeah, and that's why I tried to focus more on what Olive and Lawrence have experienced, because they're the ones that are there every single day. And she's been there for 60 years.
Yeah, since 1963.
Yeah.
That's when I was born. That's a long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, even if people are making up stories to go with what they've heard,
right,
I do think that they are more than credible, the two of them. So it's definitely haunted.
It definitely sounds like it's a great place to grow up in.
Or to visit maybe for a couple nights. Yeah.
Excellent story, dear.
Well, thanks.
We'll be back right after this quick break.
Hey, did you know? When Japan suffered food shortages at the end of World War II, Momofuku Ando decided that the wheat bread supplied by the United States was far too unfamiliar for the Japanese people. So, in 1958, after 4 months of experimentation, Ando released the very first pre-cooked instant ramen, which he named Top Ramen. He believed, quote, "Peace will come to the world when the people have enough to eat," end quote. In 1971, he realized that noodles in a styrofoam cup was the way to go with the American market, and he created cup noodles. Today, there are 2 museums in Japan dedicated to the history and popularity of instant ramen, one in Osaka and one in Yokohama. Visitors to either museum can look in on a recreation of Ando's workshop, as well as create their very own personalized cup noodles. They can also peruse catalogs of every flavor of instant ramen ever made by Ando's company. Who'da thunk it?
And we're back.
Hey, did I ever tell you about the time that I made ramen noodles in a coffee pot?
No.
Did you know that you could do that?
Well, I don't see why not, since it boils water.
I know. I thought it was pretty amazing that you just put the noodles in the pot part, and then you just put the water through, and then you wait for it to perk, and it makes ramen. I was very sheltered before I went to college. I never knew this was possible.
Well, here's the thing. If you don't have a stove...
It's perfect.
Right. You can still have ramen.
You can make coffee, and you can make ramen.
Well, as long as you wash out your pot well after you make ramen, or that coffee's going to taste awful funky.
Well, yeah. Or the other way around. That'd be a horrible thing to do to your coffee. Although you don't really add the flavor in. You don't put the flavor in the pot. You put it in the bowl and then...
Oh. See, I would have done it all together.
All right, honey. So I think it's your turn to get started. What are you talking about tonight?
Well, tonight I'm talking about a topic that maybe many of us have experienced before.
Oh.
I know I've had a run-in or two.
Oh, I know what you're going to talk about. I have not experienced this, and I hope I never do.
For thousands of years, people all over the world have been experiencing a frightening phenomenon. As they lay awake in their darkened bedrooms, something seems to loom out of the shadows. Maybe it stands in their open bedroom doorway, perfectly still, staring intently at the person in bed. Maybe the figure emerges from the corner, where the 2 walls meet. Blacker than dark itself, it's a man, wearing some sort of long coat. He has no discernible features, although sometimes people describe him as having terrifying glowing red eyes. And he wears a hat, often a fedora, although before the invention of the fedora, his hat style varied. He is reported to be tall, 6 feet tall at the very least, and even more often, people say that he's about 8 to 10 feet tall, forcing him to hunch over while he's standing. Pinned to their beds in fear, people watch as this shadow figure, known as the Hat Man, separates from the wall and moves towards them, often pausing right next to their bed. Paralyzed, as if literally frozen from the inside out, the person can't do anything except blink. They can't move, they can't scream, they're helpless and in fear as to what lies in store for them next. The Hat Man then leans over them, staring down at them with a face that they can't see. The hatred rolls off him in waves, crashing down on the victim, as a crushing pressure spreads across their chests. Yet there are times that the Hat Man doesn't seem intent on causing any physical harm at all. Perhaps what he's actually after is something more drawn out, more devious to quench his appetite. At times, he just seems to watch the sleeper, sometimes arching his overlong body over their bed, just looming over them. It's said that even though he doesn't touch his victims, they can feel evil emanating from him and they can sense that he wants to do them harm. When he's finally had his fill of fear and decides that he's going to leave, he either uses the door or he walks or glides through it. Historically, this is when many people call on their God to help them. For Christians, they may often plead inside their heads for Jesus to help them. And after several excruciating seconds of feeling as if the Hat Man is trying to steal their souls, he slowly fades away. But here's the even more frightening part. Research shows that the more you fear the Hat Man's return, the more likely he is to return, sometimes nightly, sometimes for years. Who exactly is the Hat Man? And why have people all over the world been experiencing him for as long as written history has existed? Well, that all depends on who you ask. According to theweek.com, Harvard psychology researcher Balan Jalal told Scientific American, quote, "For centuries, cultures across the world have attributed these hallucinations to black magic, mythical monsters, and even paranormal activity." End quote. He also believes that the more people fear the Hat Man, the more likely it is that they will experience another encounter.
And that's what freaks me out the most about it, is that the more you worry about it, the more likely it is to happen. And you know I'm a worrier. I'm a constant worrier.
Yeah, that you are.
So when I hear that, it just makes me worry. And then I have to, I have to make myself not think about it so that I don't.
Well, try not to think of the Hat Man tonight when you go to bed.
I do. I try not to every night because it freaks me out.
Well, I'll remember you before you go to bed tonight.
Yeah.
Not to think about it. How about that?
You're going to remind me?
Yep. Isn't that what I said?
Right before I'm falling to sleep, you're going to remind me not to think about it?
Yep.
You're so loving.
I know.
Yeah. Thanks.
Pretty caring, huh?
It is.
In the Middle Eastern cultures, the Hat Man was believed to be a jinn, what we in the West would call a genie. But jinn are nothing like the jolly blue genies in animated movies. Jinn are shapeshifters who spend most of their time invisible to humans. They can fly, and they are known to cause general mayhem. The idea of the jinn has been around in Western cultures since 1706, but in modern times, paranormal expert Rosemary Ellen Guiley wrote an entire book about the jinn in 2013 called The Jinn Connection. She theorized in her book that the jinn are actually responsible not just for Hat Man experiences, but also alien abductions. But shadow people, in general, gained widespread attention here in the U.S. 12 years before that, in 2001. On April 12, 2001, the OG of paranormal podcasting, Mr. Art Bell, interviewed a Native American elder known as Thunderstrikes on his podcast, Coast to Coast AM. Thunderstrikes basically talked about the shadow people and encouraged listeners to submit their own stories to Coast, including drawings of the shadow people that they'd encountered. This was the first time that the idea of shadow people were really talked about in such a public way. Apparently, Coast to Coast AM received numerous drawings. Thunderstrikes was apparently also a very controversial figure, but we're not going to get into that.
No, probably best not to.
In October of 2001, author Heidi Hollis published a book on shadow people and began a stint as a regular guest on Coast to Coast. In her book, she described shadow people as dark silhouettes that jump in and out of a person's peripheral vision. She didn't believe that they were jinn. She believed that they were species of alien that could be fought off or vanquished by calling on Jesus. The alien theory has gained some traction, with many experts in the paranormal field believing that the Hat Man is a being from another dimension. So, let's look a little more closely at the different theories. And while we're talking about the alien theory, we might as well stay with that one for a minute.
Alrighty.
According to liveabout.com, many people who claim to be victims of alien abductions describe similar characteristics between the Greys and Hat Man. For starters, the Greys often walk through walls and seem to emerge from them as well, just like the Hat Man does. The Greys are also known to stand still for long periods of time and just stare down at their abductees, which is very similar to what the Hat Man does. The question then is, do the aliens take on the form and shape of the Hat Man, or does Hat Man morph into the shape of a Grey? Well, there's no answer to that, of course. But being from another dimension doesn't necessarily mean alien. There's also the theory that the Hat Man is multidimensional but very human. Scientists are beginning to agree more and more that space and time is multidimensional and that other dimensions do exist. So, some shadow people experts propose that when one of these other dimensions comes too close to the dimension that we live in, a sort of bleed over happens. Human beings from that other dimension appear as shadows to us in ours. But this begs the question, why do they appear consistently as the Hat Man, and why does he seem so menacing? Is it only certain beings in other dimensions that can do this? And are they all dressed the same way? Are they scientists themselves who are popping in and out of dimensions, but they somehow don't have the social cues to know how to act? On the other hand, if this bleed over happens randomly, could you or I show up as a Hat Man to someone in another dimension? Now, that certainly seems to be some of the experts' current theories about ghosts and hauntings, so why not shadow people? In fact, some people believe that shadow people, like the Hat Man and ghost, are the same thing. If we do live in a multidimensional world, then ghosts are simply another form of this bleed over. There's two ways to look at this theory. One way is that ghosts really exist and are the spirits of the dead, and sometimes their lives bleed over into ours. The other thought is that ghosts are not dead at all. They're actually very much alive in their own dimension, and yet they are somehow bleeding over into our dimension. This might explain the difference between intelligent and residual haunts. What if the shadow people are the living version of other people from other dimensions, and we refer to them as ghosts because that's what we can relate to? Skeptics of this theory point out there's a big difference between your common apparition, a sort of see-through, misty version of a person, and shadow people, which are very dark. Maybe the more common ghostly apparition is of someone who has crossed over dimensions numerous times, and a shadow person is a newbie.
It could be, or it could be the other way around, right? The shadow person is the one that's crossed over too many times.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just all theory. But
interesting.
Everybody has their theories.
Right.
Another dimensional theory is that the Hat Man, or other shadow people, are really the shadows of present-day living people who are having out-of-body experiences. The Hat Man is simply an astral projection of that person's essence.
Then why are they all mean, though? Like, I'm not knocking your theories that you're mentioning, but why are they always so menacing? Like, if I'm astral projecting around, woo-doo-doo, and I'm, like, seeing cool new things and going, right, if I'm not scared out of my mind and actually enjoying myself, why would I go menace people?
I don't know, but to me, if you look at the Hat Man, you're in bed, you wake up to this being standing over you. Mm-hmm. Even if he's just looking at you, mm-hmm. You're automatically in fear.
Right.
So you're automatically thinking it wants to hurt me. And maybe he's just looking in on you.
Right.
Maybe he doesn't mean any harm.
Right.
He's just curious.
Right. It's possible. Yeah. I mean, being asleep is one of the most, well, it is the most vulnerable state that a human being can be in on a daily basis. And so when you're woken up like that.
Right.
Yeah.
But perhaps if you're awake and the Hat Man comes into your room, maybe he's just as startled as you are. He was expecting you to be asleep.
Right.
And he's like, well, Let's terrorize this person.
Oh, oh, great. That's what you get for not being asleep.
That's right.
How many times oh my gosh. Oh, how many times are they there and we don't know because we are asleep?
I don't know, dear.
Oh my God. I just gave myself like cold sweats. So glad you're doing this topic, honey.
With both of these theories, the astral projection and time travel, I still wonder why the Hat Man would come across as so menacing. And why does he stare at us the way that he does? Is it a vibration thing, where the vibrations of their particles just feel menacing to us, even though the beings themselves don't mean us any harm? Many people who have actually had Hat Man experiences might claim that every single one of these theories is a bunch of hooey because their experiences are so terrifying. And since invoking the name of religious figures seems to make the Hat Man go away, is it possible that he's some sort of demon? This is definitely a popular theory, and it holds some weight across all cultures and belief systems. If you want a more scientific explanation for the Hat Man, well, there's one of those also. Sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a proven medical state that might be brought on by heightened stress or anxiety. It occurs as a person is falling asleep or just waking up, even though it affects anywhere from 5 to 40% of the world's population. Experts still don't entirely understand why. What sleep experts do know is that it happens when someone's REM sleep is disturbed. During REM sleep, your brain purposely paralyzes your muscles in some ways in order to keep you safe from physically acting out your dreams. When sleep paralysis happens, your body is in that paralysis state, but your mind is actually awake and very aware that you can't move. According to WebMD.com, this state of paralysis can be accompanied by a loud buzzing noise, the sensation of flying or being dragged out of bed, and the feeling as though you can't breathe. Now, it doesn't say this on WebMD, but many sleep study experts believe that it also causes hallucinations like the Hat Man. They do point out that sleep paralysis is 100% harmless, and the best way to avoid sleep paralysis is to get plenty of sleep.
How helpful. If you want to avoid it, sleep more.
Yep. Perhaps that's why you sleep so much.
Could be, because I'm trying to avoid
sleep paralysis,
which truly is one of the things that frightens me.
Maybe you should drink a glass of warm milk before bed.
Yeah, and then my lactose intolerance will kick in. You're just full of helpful tips tonight.
It's what your grandmother would have said.
I know.
Have a glass of warm milk.
I know.
It'll make you feel better.
Yep.
Ugh. Hate warm milk.
It is pretty gross.
So, if the visits from the Hat Man are simply a symptom of sleep paralysis, then how come people all over the world are seeing the Hat Man, who looks exactly the same no matter what culture you might be from? So, you would think that if he's simply a figment of our imagination during a disrupted REM cycle, that he'd look different depending on where you were or where you're from. And why are some people claiming to see him when they are 100% awake? Now, there are some ideas about that too, which tend to center on the power of suggestion. Just probably like I've been doing to you.
Yes.
Since this story. According to theweek.com, psychology professor Christopher French believes that the Hat Man phenomenon could be a mixture of sleep paralysis and pop culture. He points to one of the most iconic of all horror movie villains, Freddy Krueger, as an example. Freddy Krueger attacks while his victims are sleeping, and he wears a hat.
Yes, he does.
Perhaps people are experiencing sleep paralysis, and in their waking sense of terror and fear that they are not being able to move, their subconscious is latching on to a very common figure of terror. And at this point, he's known worldwide. French's theory lends itself to the proven fact that people who fear seeing the Hat Man again after a first experience often have a second or third one, because the stress and anxiety of possibly seeing him again messes with their sleep, and so they end up seeing him again. It is a vicious, horrible cycle, starring a horror movie villain from 1994.
That's interesting. I mean, I don't know if I would say Freddy Krueger per se, because when I think of the Hat Man, I don't think of the Freddy Krueger hat. That's not a fedora, is it?
No. Well, yeah.
It is?
Kind of, yeah.
And he doesn't wear a coat. He wears that striped sweater.
Yeah.
Right?
I never found Freddy Krueger to be frightening.
Right. But
I never liked the character.
But I get what he's saying. That
Right.
it's a villain that everybody around the world now knows at this point, and so that's the one that perpetuates.
There are similarities to him, yes.
I guess I'd rather him than the Babadook.
I don't know. I mean, if I'm going to have an experience like that, I'd rather see the Babadook than Freddy Krueger. Who wants some dude showing up in a hat and a freaking sweater with long nails? I'd rather see Edward Scissorhands. According to Ripley's.com, the Hat Man only varies slightly across cultures at this point. He can appear anywhere between 6 and 10 feet tall, and his eyes might or might not glow red. For some people, he appears to hold a gold pocket watch. But other than that, the reports are all the same. Long coat, darker than the shadows, no other features, and a hat. He's generally silent. There are only a few cases in which he allegedly spoke, and in all cases, he's a watcher. He watches you from either a dark corner or he bends over you to peer down at you. He sounds like a peeper.
He does. But it does sound like stuff Freddy Krueger would do. But I guess it sounds like stuff any horror movie villain would do.
Right.
Yeah.
Anybody coming into your bedroom.
Right.
Sleep experts who say that sleep paralysis is the absolute cause of the Hat Man encounters would argue that people who claim they are totally awake when they see him are actually mistaken. And I say they're fools. They are actually caught in a disrupted REM cycle. And although you may mentally feel as though you are awake, your body isn't. No one can definitely prove any of these theories. Even sleep experts struggle to study sleep paralysis because it's so unpredictable as far as when or if it will even happen.
Right. Because just because you say you're suffering from it doesn't mean that when you go in for your sleep studies, you're going to have an experience.
It's not an on-demand kind of thing.
Right.
WebMD.com does give some other helpful advice to try and avoid sleep paralysis. Try not to go to bed feeling stressed or anxious.
Sure.
I know. I mean, really? Most Americans do these days.
Right.
Everything's gone up in price. I mean, people have stress.
Right.
Also, allow yourself to relax, because the more you fear falling asleep, the more likely you are to have sleep issues. And make yourself stick to a regimented sleep schedule. In other words, make sure you get enough sleep every single night. So, wow, some of that's pretty obvious.
Right. Not very helpful, WebMD.
Not at all.
If you're afraid of sleep paralysis in the Hat Man, first, sleep more. Don't be stressed. And relax. That's all you got to do. I should give advice like that. I'm going to start a website where I give advice like that for every single issue. Just stop.
Yeah.
Just chill.
So, as I was researching, I came across an interesting website called the Hat Man Project. It's an online forum of sorts where people can submit their own Hat Man experiences with absolutely no judgment. If you're interested in reading some of the experiences that people have had Or if you want to submit one of your own, the web address is thehatmanproject.com. So, like I said before, who or what the Hat Man is really depends on who you ask. And for those of you that have experienced it,
I'm sorry.
it can be totally and utterly terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, for those of you that listen to us, if you have experienced it, I like I said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Not something I'd want to experience.
Yeah.
Did this backfire on you? You were trying to get into my head and now you got into your own?
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Not at all.
Oh, all right.
But I love the theories about the dimensions.
Yeah.
I mean, I have so many theories, really, if you were to sit down and talk about it. And we do sometimes, while we're having our weekends.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of cool theories. And there's a lot of it that does hold weight.
Right, of the multi-dimensions. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. It's what my young adult sci-fi was about, was multi-dimensions.
Right.
Yep.
All right, dear. With all that said, I think that about wraps it up.
Yes, it's hotter than Hades in here.
That it is.
We've been talking long enough.
And if you want to know more, what do you do, Beth?
Oh, you check out our sources in our show notes, where you can find where we've got our information and turned it into our episode. There's always a lot more there, so if you're interested, go check it out.
Yep. Join us again next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.
Or maybe you won't.
Asshole.
You never know. That Hat Man might come for you tonight.
Nice. Who's going to get kicked when I finally am able to fend it off? You're going to get kicked. More than likely.
No, I wrap myself up in a cocoon.
Yeah.
A blanket.
Right.
It'd take a lot to really hurt me under all that.
Yeah.
See y'all soon.